So here we are. We're back to it.
Cold.
Cold. It is cold here in northern Indiana. It is pretty cold, but we got an idea today for just kind of like a discussion topic that I kind of want to pick Steve's brain. You know, I've noticed since we started doing this, Steve, that man, what's the word I'm looking for? You ingest a ton of different like strength and conditioning like content. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems like it's, obviously we're both interested in it, but it seems like, man, you listen to so many podcasts, read so many books, and are just like, deep into the whole field of strength conditioning. And I feel like there's a lot that that you're up to date on that I'm not. And so this is one of the things that I've been seeing you post a lot about lately is like eccentric training and the benefits of training the brakes. And the first one that kind of like piqued my interest, or one of the ones that piqued my interest, is when you shared that study a couple weeks ago that looked at the differences, I think it was soccer players, that looked at the differences between, the elite level soccer players and, people that are a level underneath them. And I didn't read the study at all. I, read through what you reposted, but I thought that was super interesting. Well, you can probably explain it better than I can.
So it was a report by Vald, the force plate technology company, where, and I might be getting some of this wrong, but like all the Premier League soccer teams, all the best out in England or in Europe, they all have the force plates. They got the Nord boards. They got I think it's called force frame, where you're doing abduction, adduction, and they would test like the own strength staff or athletic trainers would test the players every week or whatever it is. And a lot of it was just showing like what day of the week, like some parts of the report, what day of the week did they get tested the most? What test did they use the most? Counter movement jump, what did they, blah, blah, blah. And it's not just the Premier League, it's, again, some other leagues that are lower level, lower than Premier League, which again is like the top. It's the NFL, it's the NBA. And the biggest difference, I would show like the 4 or 5 different leagues that they use, and they would have all of the, not just tests that they did, but like outcomes from counter movement jump or vertical jump, and be like jump height, and it would be the average among those, and like, I don't know, impulse, and it would be all these metrics that the force plates can detect and measure. And the biggest differentiator was between the Premier League players, the best of the best, and everyone else. The biggest difference, there was maybe some jump height differences, like they could jump higher, or there might have been some other small differences. But the biggest one was eccentric rate of force development braking, or eccentric braking rate of force development. So how fast people can hit the brakes. Yeah. And it's like, man, it's just, there was another one that I didn't post. It was for basketball, and they did like, I don't think they released NBA data, but they did like, I forget the different leagues, but the NCAA for men, NCAA women, and a couple other like smaller organizations. And again, the biggest differentiator was eccentric braking rate of force development. Yeah. It's like, okay, the better athletes, doesn't mean they jump higher, doesn't mean they run faster necessarily, but just being better at your sport, you're in the better organization, you can hit the brakes faster. Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's something there for sure. You know what I mean? Because I think it's one thing to be able to apply a lot of force into the ground. It's a whole different thing. I think a lot of like strength conditioning training that that takes place, and a lot of the stuff that we do is concentric focus. You know what I mean? Which obviously there's that plays a big role in how you perform as an athlete. But I think something that we've talked about this a little bit before, something that is important as well is like your eccentric ability. And I think it's harder to kind of train that or to quantify that outside of, using force plates and high tech things like that. So to me, it's like when you look at studies like that where there's clearly significant differences between how fast somebody can apply the brakes, and like different scenarios, sports scenarios, and you see that the people that are better athletes are able to do that better. It's like, well, you know, we need to dig more into that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So I've seen you do like a lot of just different training lately, like clips that you've put up of yourself training, of different ways of training, like the eccentric ability to handle force, and I know absorb force. We can talk about that too, the whole idea of absorbing force. But like, what are some ways that you found that you like personally to train like the eccentric ability? Because, you know, I've been playing around with it a little bit myself as well in training, and I find that you know, most of the stuff, at least lower body wise, most of the stuff that I found that feels good to me is more like knee dominant, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So like doing different like single leg lands, and like going into like split squats, where it's like, yeah, a lot of the stuff that I do that feels good is more knee dominant. So I'm curious, one, the things that you found that feel good to you, and two, kind of outside the typical the typical like eccentric training, where you're going into split squats and doing single leg lands or bilateral lands. Like, what are some other kind of techniques that you found that work for you and that feel good?
Yeah. So in my brain, I think of eccentrics in like 3 different categories, 3 different pillars.
Okay.
There's like just doing tempo training. Like, you know, it's a weight you can control, it's a weight you can stand up with. And let's say I'm just thinking squat. And you do 3 seconds down, 5 seconds down, whatever it is, and then lift up. And you do 5 seconds down, you lift up. And you do that for however many reps. So it's submaximal.
Yeah.
I mean, we've both done plenty of this stuff. You have to use a lighter load if you're going down so slow, and you're doing it for multiple reps. I think that's more like, I'm sure there is some hypertrophy benefit to it.
Sure.
But I think for me, it's more like just learning the movement, especially for a beginner, or it's reconditioning your tissues to do that movement and feel these loads in a safer way. Like, man, it's hard. It would be difficult for someone to get hurt doing a submaximal like tempo lift.
Yeah.
So it's like a safer way to learn the movement, and hey, I haven't lifted in a while. Okay, let's start with this and just kind of get you back to it. It's just going to force you to use lighter loads. So there's that like deliberate tempo. Then there's like heavy eccentrics. Cal Dietz, I think, has made it more popular, the super maximal eccentrics, where, as you know, there's concentric, there's isometric where the muscle doesn't move, and there's eccentric where the muscle lengthens. Concentric is our weakest, isometric is the second strongest. We are strongest eccentrically. And so Cal Dietz has wrote about and talked about having people do split squat. So a one leg focus, not completely one leg, but one leg focus with 120% of their bilateral back squat max.
Yeah, which is crazy.
And you're just fighting it down, fighting it down, fighting it down. Then you got partners helping you lift the weight up. And you might only do 1 or 2 reps of that. So I think there's the super heavy, whether it's super maximal or not, eccentrics. They're going to lead to huge strength gains. Going to make your muscles really strong eccentrically, being able to handle an eccentric or a braking force. It's going to make you super sore.
Yeah.
We used to do back in high school, I don't know if you remember at the old Max Fitness, like doing negatives on bench press, where you're fighting it and then your partner lifts it up.
Yeah.
We were just doing whatever we could. So there's those 2, and then there's fast eccentrics. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, and there's accentuated, and there's bands and accelerated, but there's fast eccentrics. I think that's what you're talking about. So some of my favorites are drops, like you talked about, bilateral, unilateral, different positions. I had athletes playing around with like a rear foot elevated one, and you like rear foot elevated on the bench, you kind of jump out and stick the landing.
Yeah.
And I had them do it from a or one leg elevated, but they're doing it into like a lateral lunge position, just being able to, just a different position, different vector. So playing around with a lot of that stuff. And I think all of that, whether it's drops, single leg, you could be like standing tall position with dumbbells or a bar on your back and just instantly go into a split or like lunge position. Rear foot elevated, even just like a lunge where you're just falling forward and have to stop.
Yeah.
But I think all that still goes into your like more knee dominant category.
Yeah. Do you do any hinging? Like anything?
So posterior chain, I think there's some easier ones, safer ones, like a hip bridge.
Mm-hmm.
You're up in a hip bridge position, like a glute focused hip bridge. And when you come up, you lift your hips up, then you kind of jump and put your feet out there and catch it, and you're on a longer, more hamstring focused position.
Yeah.
You can do that single leg, you can do that off a box, you can do that with weight on. And with all of these, there's times where you want to like absorb or kind of mush into the ground. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with that, depending on your focus. But for most of these, what I think we're talking about is your goal is to hit the brakes.
You want to be stiff.
You want to stop immediately.
Yeah.
Now it can be at different depths, but yeah, your goal is to hit the brakes. And then I've also done from RDL position, just dropping the bar. I've had the combine or draft prep guys do this as well. If you're in an RDL position as far as like posture, and you drop the bar and you go to catch it and stop it. Now we were doing this, I think I had them max out at 65 pounds.
Yeah.
And these are guys who have been doing RDLs for probably 8 years, you know, like, and we worked up to it. We started with heavy bilateral RDLs, then we went to split stance RDL, then we went to these drops. Excuse me. I've heard Stu McMillan of Altus talk about doing the same thing, but from a staggered stance, so it's more single leg dominant. But you could do it with anything, any movement you want. You could do it with a hamstring curl machine where you curl, let's say you curl the weight in, and then quickly you take your foot off of it and hit the brakes as it flies up to you.
Yeah.
So you could do it in any way you want. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different options. I guess I have done those. I call them like hamstring catches like you're talking about. I did those last year with I think one of our after school, I think our football team, I did that with them, and that I do like that one because it's like, especially when you look at, you know, a lot of the positions that you're in when you sprint, not a lot, but some of the positions that you're in when you sprint, you know, a lot of times injuries come from, depending on where that foot hits when you're sprinting, you know, your hamstring obviously is in more of a lengthened state than it is a shortened state. So something like that, where it was interesting watching the kids kind of play around with it, and that was pretty new for most of them, if not all of them. You know, they've never really done that. So a lot of times we would see, because I went straight to, once we started doing the catches, I think I went straight to a single leg catch. And then like the kids that couldn't handle it, like our bigger kids or kids that just haven't been training for a long time, I would have them either do a double leg or just do like a glute bridge, like march, where you march out further and then walk it back. But the kids that were able to kind of pick up the idea of the hamstring catch, you know, more often than not, they would catch it. They would catch with a smaller angle at their knee, if that makes sense. So they're not, because I would tell them, I want your leg to be 90% straight when you catch it, right? But a lot of them, especially, you know, when they first started, they're catching it here at this angle, rather than, they're not very comfortable the longer in a lengthened phase of the muscle, you know what I mean? So that was interesting. But I like those a lot. I just don't know, because I would do, I think, 3 reps on each leg, and then it would be, I would have them hold it for like 4 or 5 seconds on the catch.
Okay.
You know, and then after that, I would kind of take away the hold at the end, maybe add a few more reps. But something like that, I think, is great. It challenges the kids, and it puts them in a position that they're probably not super comfortable with. I've done them myself, but not with athletes. I've never done like the catches with the RDLs, just, you know, I think for obvious reasons. I think there's a little bit higher potential, especially for someone that is not super strong or has a high training age. I think there's a higher potential to tweak something there, to have some type of lower grade injury. But I've done most of the ones that you talked about with like more knee dominant or knee focused. I guess I've never done like a rear leg elevated. I've seen you do those recently. But I think it's interesting the fact that, PSM has force plates and you're able to look at, how much force you're producing on all of these movements. And I know you talk about it all the time, there's no other exercise out there that you can produce more force than like depth drop variations. You know what I mean? So maybe break down a little bit the whole idea of absorbing force and what that actually means, because I use that all the time. I think it's a common term, but I understand the flip side of it. You're not really absorbing that force. You're producing force to stop your body weight from crumbling or falling further into the ground. So don't have to spend a long time on that, but like why do we not absorb force as athletes?
Yeah, I probably use that phrase as well. It's kind of like a muscle memory.
Yeah.
I remember working for Pete Bomarito. He's like, there's no such thing as muscle memory.
Yeah.
Like, I don't go into a weight room squat and go into a football field and instead of tackling, I think I need to squat. It's like, okay, we get that. But like, and yes, memory is not stored in the muscle. Okay, but like muscle memory, to talk to like a lay person, like there's nothing wrong with saying that.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Absorbing force. No, we don't really absorb force. The force that we see, if we're doing a depth drop onto force plates and we see this huge spike in force, it's our body had to produce that force in order to stop ourselves from completely crumbling into the floor.
Sure.
Just like someone jumping off a roof and they land and kind of roll. There's going to be, to some degree, much lower forces because of how they're kind of managing that. With a depth drop, you're sticking it, your body has to produce enough force for you to not crash into the ground, for you to hit the brakes quickly.
Yeah.
So, no, we don't absorb force. Your body has to produce it. That's what we see. I think absorption makes sense, like from why are we doing this? Like, it's an easy way to explain it. You could even talk about like kind of loading up the tissue, really the tendons, like a rubber band, like you're I get it. Yeah, technically we're not absorbing force.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, it's some of it is semantics, you know what I mean? But like you said, if you're speaking to a lay person or a young athlete, it's like, it makes more sense to them to be able to understand kind of what the concept is. But that's something else that I've noticed, especially because I don't even know what week we're in, but on all of our plyo days up to this point, we've done some type of like depth drop, and it's usually just we'll jump up to a box and on the back end you do a depth drop before you're doing your other plyos. But something I've noticed just watching athletes do that, the better, the better athletes are able to land stiffer,
In that, I think, sorry to cut you off, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Like, that was my post recently about like, if the better athletes can do this, or if we know this is the quality that's important, why don't we do it more?
Yeah.
I think it was, to your point earlier, like, it's easier to measure concentric act. Put weight on the bar, can you lift it? Yes.
Yeah.
And so to measure eccentric action or even isometric strength is tougher. And I think therefore to get buy-in from the athlete, or in my situation, the athlete and the parent, you probably the athlete and the coach.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're doing this. I can't show any results from it, but I'm telling you it's important.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, if the better athletes are better at doing it, that's a sign.
It reminds me, one of the things that Tony said, he was just talking about like the continuous like box jumps or tuck jumps rather. The same kind of thing that he said. He's like, when after coaching for so long, when you're able to pick out, okay, the better athletes that I have do whatever this is better, everybody should probably get better at this.
Yes.
But it is interesting, especially, we see it a lot, older athletes that are more mature body-wise are, able to land stiffer in a more, rigid position, whereas a lot of young athletes, freshmen, some sophomores, they just can't.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like I try to explain it in different ways and try to use examples of what it should look like, and they just can't do it. You know what I mean? They just still are they sink into it more and are not. They just don't have the ability to land stiff and rigid like we want them to, or maybe I'm just not getting across better to them.
I'm sure you are if other athletes get it.
But it is, you know, it's interesting just looking at the difference between, okay, I know this person is a pretty good athlete and they're able to land in a certain position and in a certain way that we want them to, and maybe a younger athlete or an athlete that might not be as naturally talented as that person, the other person just can't seem to figure it out or do it how we want them to, at least right now. You know, hopefully in the future they'll be able to do it. But I think that's also something that you see, you know, when you're watching sport. You know, when you watch, you know, the better athletes play sports, I think that's one of the biggest things, at least on the football field, that sets the really good athletes apart from the good athletes is just how fast. The way I always think about it is like how fast they're able to get in and out of cuts. You know what I mean?
Perfect, yes.
And you see it with like multiple of the athletes that we've had over the past couple of years. Like, it's just night and day between them and more average athletes, whether that's athletes on our team or athletes that we play against. But you can just see it. You know what I mean? You can see it when they're making moves or getting out of cuts or breaking down to make a tackle. Like, the better athletes are able to get in and out of those positions, you know, faster. And it's really what it comes down to.
Yes.
You know, and a lot of that, again, I feel like if you don't have a good baseline knowledge of even just the 3 different muscular contractions, it's kind of hard to conceptualize that. But when you understand, like you broke down earlier, like your concentric, your isometric, and your eccentric phases of muscle contractions, and you're able to pinpoint, you know, the one that makes the most significant difference, you know, in my opinion, like we're talking about, is the eccentric portion of being able to apply the brakes and then obviously reapply the force that you need to. But when you're able to kind of pick that out and see it in the actual sporting event, it's like, yeah, we should probably do more of that one thing that makes more of a significant difference.
Yeah, because, and I know I'm not teaching you anything, but like all these movements in athletics are just movements in general. There's going to be all 3 of those contractions. If we're thinking sprinting, because of course I want to talk about sprinting, there's always, like, you hit the ground, there's technically going to be an eccentric action as your like foot hits the ground and kind of mushes a little bit. That's the eccentric lengthening action. Your body's going to stop for a fraction of a second, like less time than we really think. It's going to come to a complete pause. The muscle will act isometrically and not move. And then your tendon will do most of the work. It'll kind of stretch. This is your calf. It doesn't like lengthen at all. It just holds its place. The tendon lengthens and kind of snaps you forward. And the muscle will contract as well, concentrically. So all 3 of these muscle actions happen with, if I'm throwing a baseball, I'm going to load up eccentrically. There's going to be a brief isometric pause, and then I'm going to throw it concentrically. Like, all of these things always happen. So they're all important to train. I think we as an industry just focus more on the concentric because, again, it's easier to measure and easier to see and get buy-in. She don't even know where I was going with that. I just felt like whatever you said, drew that out of me.
No, that makes sense. And it's, you know, you mentioned earlier, like in the past when we were younger, like we would do a decent amount of like negative, like bench press. And that's one thing, at least thinking back on it, like that's one thing that I saw the most results from. And that's still to this day, like if an athlete comes up to me, mainly on the bench, it's like, oh, I feel like I'm plateauing, or I've been at this weight for however long and I just feel like I'm not getting stronger. There's a couple of different things we can talk about. But one of the things that I usually always mention is like, hey, if you work out with a group or if you have spotters that you're comfortable with doing this, like do some negatives where you like go to 110 or 120% of whatever your 1 rep max is, and just do like a 5-second negative just to train the eccentric portion of that movement, which, as you mentioned, we're stronger in. Kind of reminds me of like, Tony Holler one of his sayings is like, speed is the tide that raises all boats, or however he puts
Yep,
that.
yep.
I think of it in a similar sense of the eccentric muscle contraction is if you get stronger eccentrically, you're probably going to get stronger concentrically and isometrically. And so still to this day, I'll recommend athletes, as long as they have proper spotting and things to do that correctly. I think that's one thing that, you can make a ton of progress on,
Yes.
especially if you feel like, if you have a higher training age and if you feel like you're kind of stuck at a certain point, I think that's something that you can see a lot of progress with. You can do it with other movements too. It's harder, obviously, or a little bit riskier, like you said, with like a split squat or even like a bilateral back squat or front squat or whatever it is. Like, I probably wouldn't recommend that. But that also reminds me of something I was going to mention earlier is like you've seen the, I don't even know what the technical term for them are, but like the weight releasers that you put
Yeah.
on like barbells, you know what I mean? I think that is also a good way to kind of train super maximal eccentric weights. So like, if we're squatting, they have, weight releases that you put on each side of the barbell. And say if my back squat is 315, I might have, I don't know, a 25 pound on each side to make it 365. So I know I can't concentrically lift that, but if you do it in an eccentric portion for 2 or 3 seconds on the way down, and then once you reach a certain depth, they release, they fall off, so that way you're just left with whatever weight you have on the bar. So those I think are a good option. Obviously we don't have any of those. Downside to that is like, okay, after each rep you have to, you have to reset it. So it's kind of tedious, but again, it goes back to the idea of, up until this point, testing and training the concentric ability of lifting weights is just more convenient. It's easier. It's kind of what strength conditioning has been focused on for a long time, I think. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's just easier to train that ability and capacity. But I think we're going to see more and more as people people continue to look into the idea of eccentric training. I feel like we'll see more and more just different ways to not only train it, but to test it as well. And again, I don't know what that looks like outside of using force plates, which, a lot of people don't have access to.
Yeah, it's expensive.
But I'm sure, someone out there will come up with something.
I'm sure.
To be able to test it. But it is interesting just kind of thinking about the whole idea of eccentric training and kind of the benefits that you can get out of it.
Yeah. And even thinking back to what you said, I don't know, 2 minutes ago about doing a negative, and like you see a ton of results from doing like heavy, super maximal negatives. And you see it with your athletes as well. I think it's because the eccentric portion, since we are stronger with it, is like constantly undertrained. Since we never reach like a heavy eccentric, because we got to be able to concentrically lift it off. And again, since eccentric action is happening with everything, I think it puts you, if you're stronger there, it puts you in a better position for the concentric action. It's like, it has to happen. You might as well be really strong and good at managing that.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It'd just be interesting to see kind of what people come up with and different ways to train it. So we've mentioned a few, or at least the bench press, like upper body, different ways to train eccentrically. I've also seen you, and I've done it myself, actually just this past week, of kind of like a upper body depth drop, like in a push-up position type of thing where, I think I did it like with 12-inch boxes where you start up and then you land, like half push-up or wherever you want to be, again, landing in a rigid portion. But, outside of those, do you have any other upper body ways to train like the eccentric portion? I know I've seen you do like the, with both like an inverted row and the pull-ups, kind of like the catches, similar to the RDL catch. So I've seen that, but are there any other ways that you found that work well or that feel good?
Yeah, for the most part, you can do it with anything. So yes, the push-up one. Did you do it on the turf? And see, man, I don't know what it is. I think it's because my wrist doesn't bend that much, either one of them. So I did it off like maybe an 18, but landed on a 6-inch box.
I got
Just
you.
kind of help my wrist. Pull-up ones destroy me. I get super sore from them. I've done it with inverted row as well. You just pull yourself up, you let go, or at least like you're almost thinking like punch it away and then stop.
Yeah.
But you can do it with, I've seen videos of like Adam Archuleta or whatever doing it on bench press, letting go and then catching it. I wouldn't recommend that. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is wild.
I've had a lot of athletes do it with shoulder stuff. So like a side raise, drop it, catch it, drop it, catch it. There's different ways to do it where it's like a heavier-ish weight or like a 2-pound weight and you're trying to stop immediately. You could do it with a ton of bicep stuff, drop and catch. At shoulder, I'd said side raise, you could do front raise, you could do rear raise, you could do like Y position where you're bent over. Anywhere where you can drop it and stop it without having to worry about it falling on your head.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah. Would you ever use any of that like as a main movement, or are these mainly like accessory movements?
For the upper body stuff, you could, but typically the main movement doesn't have to be this way. Typically the main movement is like a press, and I think that's where it gets trickier. But like for lower body,
Yeah,
I would use that as a main. If pull-ups is your main movement, which it definitely could and should be at sometimes, I think you could definitely use that as a main movement.
Yeah.
It's the highest force you're going to have for the day. It's the fastest contraction you're going to have for the day. And it's the exercise that's going to make you the most sore. Like, not that that's necessarily a goal, but I think for all those reasons, it checks the box at going towards the front.
Yeah. Yeah, it isn't just interesting thinking about it, you know, because we talked about it a couple weeks ago about, you know, the idea of doing things differently and thinking outside the box and being able to at least be open-minded enough to think about the potential benefit of doing things differently than how it's been done the past however many decades, you know, and I think this is one of those things that kind of fits into that. Eccentric training by no means is anything new.
No.
You know, but I think the more research is done on it and the more people look at, kind of like you said that Vol did with the differences between, you know, elite level athletes, you know, the more things kind of point towards the eccentric portion, how, you know, significant it can be. I think the more, you know, it's important to kind of dig a little deeper into that and find different ways to do it.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
All parts, all three of those muscle contractions are clearly important.
Yeah.
I just think typically the eccentric and the isometric, because they're stronger than the concentric, I think those two are undertrained, especially at like a fast, high speed level. But I'm with you, it's not new. Like somewhat recently, Cal Dietz, triphasic training.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
It was all about that. He tells a story, I think it was of 2 throwers, like shot put throwers or something. And let's say it's me and you can throw it a lot farther than me, but we're the same strength on bench press or whatever lift we think is important. And Cal started, I forget exactly what it was, but tracking like their bar speed or whatever. He's like, even though we can lift the same weight, let's say me, I have to like grind it out while you can like boom, boom, and it's quick, but you can't really get any heavier weights. It's just a much more efficient V, even if you look at the cover of triphasic training, that V. Shoot, I forgot where I was going. Oh, so it's not new. Cal talked about it. There's a book before him called, I think it's by Dr. Michael Yesses. It's like Extreme Plyometrics or something like that. I forget the exact title. And like the first couple chapters are all about, like there's an eccentric muscle action, there's an isometric muscle action, there's a concentric muscle action. And like you need to be really strong in all three. And I was like, bro, this feels just like, I read triphasic training before that. And I was like, this feels just like triphasic training. Super training, which is from, I don't even know what year, talks a good amount about the eccentric and isometric portions and like training them fast. Jay Schrader's always talked about it. This DB Hammer guy has always talked about it. yeah, again, it's not new,
Yeah.
but it's so much easier to get buy-in with, hey, we got more weight on the bar for your curl, your squat, your bench press.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to be like, look at that landing off this 48-inch
Yeah, yeah.
box. Like, look how much more rigid they are, or
Yeah.
whatever. And it's hard to quantify these things.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think those are all good starting points for people that maybe want to understand a little bit better. My first thought, like you mentioned, was triphasic training from Cal Dietz. Like, think, I'm not familiar with any of the other books that you mentioned, but any of those I think would be a good starting point for people that are interested in just at least learning about the 3 different muscle contractions and why all 3 are important in their own right. I think those are good starting points. Something else that I thought of as you were talking about all those books is like, I worked for Eccentric, the flywheel training company, for a couple years out of grad school. And that was really I still think to this day, one of the main benefits of flywheel training is its ability to train the eccentric portion of a movement. And so very brief overview. So like flywheel training, you have a platform that you stand on that's, 6, 12 inches off the ground. It's got a flywheel that's like a weighted like metal plate. Flywheel connects to like a wheel rod or a spin wheel that basically leads underneath the platform, and then that is connected to some type of attachment. So like easiest is like a squat belt. So you have a squat belt that's attached to a strap that is connected to this spin rod, and the spin rod is in front of it has the flywheel mounted on top, or basically on it. So it's very similar to a yo-yo, right? The harder you throw a yo-yo down, the faster it's going to spin back up, and you're going to be able to catch it. It's the same thing with the flywheel. So when you're squatting concentrically, the faster you stand up and spin that spin rod, and in turn spin the flywheel, that flywheel at the top, as your strap runs out, is going to spin back around, and all of that inertia is going to be put back into the spin wheel, back into the strap, and ultimately back into you. And so we would do a lot of different things of how to train the eccentric portion with a flywheel, if that makes sense. And just because you're using a flywheel doesn't mean you are overloading the eccentric portion of movement. That's something that a lot of people would get confused on. I think a lot because we focus so much on promoting like eccentric overload, and that's one of the benefits of the flywheel. Just because you're using a flywheel doesn't mean that you are overloading the eccentric portion of movement, but you are forced to absorb or control the eccentric portion of movement with a flywheel than you are with just like traditional free weights. And mainly because with a flywheel, it's gravity independent. There's no gravity involved. So if you're squatting with a barbell, as you are in the eccentric portion of a movement, gravity is kind of obviously pulling on the weight and more or less assisting you with that eccentric portion of movement. Whereas with a flywheel, all of the force that you put into whatever movement you're doing is going to be given back to you on the eccentric portion of movement. So if you don't control that weight, or if you don't have the ability to control the inertia, if you will, on the eccentric portion, very similar to how you mentioned with like a box or a depth drop, is like it's gonna pull you down. Like if you can't stop it, the wheel's not gonna stop. You know what I mean? So like different things that we would do is like if you do a full range of motion squat, and then concentrically, and then eccentrically stop it halfway down, you are technically overloading the eccentric portion of a movement. We would do the same thing with like, we would go RDL into a high pull, and then stop it halfway down into like an RDL.
Really?
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Similar to like the catches that you talked about, but stopping it on the halfway down, because obviously with the RDL you get some force into it, but with the high pull you can really kind of move it pretty fast, and then stop it as rigid and as fast as you can. A lot of different ways that we would do it. We would do it with like triceps and stuff. And again, you could do double leg into single leg. So like we would do that with RDLs sometimes too, just have something to hold on to, or use two hands on the way up, okay, and then you use one hand to balance yourself into like a single leg RDL type of thing. There's a lot of different other ones that it's been a couple of years since I've actually done this stuff, but that's one thing that I didn't even think of before we started this, but as you're mentioning it, I think the flywheel training, and again, it's not, at least for some companies, it's a decent price point, especially at the high school setting. There's probably not a ton of room in the budget for it, but if you're able to afford it, I think there's a lot of, again, PSM has a couple different flywheel contraptions. There's a lot of, when I worked there were a ton of like collagen proteins that invested in it for a lot of different reasons, but one of them I think is just the ability to train the eccentric portion in a different way than what you would with like traditional free weight, like gravity-based training, like what we called it.
Yeah, I was thinking of this on my drive over here. Like I wanted to bring this up and I forgot, so I'm happy you did. Do you remember, might have been a year, maybe 2 years ago, where I started playing around with the one at the field house, and I was asking you, like, all right, like this doesn't, because I was doing, let's say, rows with it, because ours is attached to like the wall.
Yeah, it's like the K-pulley.
Yeah, yeah. I can jimmy rig it to do squats, like you just need 2 boxes, but it's not the best.
Yeah.
But I was doing rows with it, and I'm like, I'm pulling hard, but again, since you're stronger eccentrically than concentrically, and I'm just like controlling it all the way back, it's like, this isn't that difficult. And you were like, don't control it. Like, don't control it all the way to the end range. Like, if I'm doing seated rows, you're like, basically pull it as hard as you can and then stop it.
Yeah.
And I probably have videos on my phone of, like, I'm sitting down, I got my feet up against like a plate or a wall or something, and I'm pulling, I stop, and like my arms could stop it, but it would like lift me off the ground, and I'd sit back down and pull and stop, and then back down. So yeah, it's exactly what you're saying as far as like drops and stuff like that. Yeah, flywheel's a fun one to play around with.
It is fun to play around with, and it takes a little bit to get used to.
Yes.
You know?
And the setup for me personally sometimes takes a second, because you got to figure out, like, you got to adjust the cord to where's like the end range of the concentric.
Sure.
So that might take a second, but other than that, it's not bad.
And once you get used to it, it's pretty easy to learn. But when people first try it, it's like, it's such a different feel. And there is the setup is a lot different than what you would see with like a free weight type of thing. But once you get used to it, man, it's a different feeling.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. It's a different feeling. It's like, you know, when you look at how flywheel training like first started, they used it with like astronauts originally.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because it's like, again, like if you're an astronaut and you're in a zero gravity situation, like you're gonna atrophy, you're gonna lose a ton of muscle.
You're gonna lose bone.
Yeah, bone density, all of that stuff is going to start to drop when you're in a zero gravity situation, especially long term. So they, you know, needed some way to, okay, if we don't have gravity, how are we going to do resistance training or be able to maintain muscle mass? And like flywheel training was kind of birthed out of that.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So that's where it was first used. And then people started using it with like, oh, maybe we can use this with like injured or like return to play athlete situations. And then people were like, well, what if we use these with like healthy athletes, you know? And then it's obviously grown to the point that it is today. But yeah, if you're not familiar with flywheel training or don't know what we're talking about, look it up. You know, it's some interesting stuff, and there's a lot of good research. And again, I haven't worked there for years. It's been 5+ years, almost 6 years probably since I've worked there. So I'm sure it has continued to grow, just flywheel training in general. But it's an interesting kind of novel training methodology that might be kind of new to some people that would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, and it is a way, we were talking about force plates and stuff, to measure the eccentric through their app.
Yeah,
you
that's
can
true.
actually measure, like, what is I think it's just like the overall capacity, like, what is the eccentric force? Yeah. Which is a good number to keep track of.
Yeah, cool. I didn't even think of that. I forgot they have their whole K meter, I think they call it a K meter. They have that where you hook it up to an app and you can see your outputs and things like that. So that's all good stuff. Like I said, I didn't even think of that until we started talking about this stuff. But that's another good kind of newer, if you will, or more novel training methodology that a lot of people might not be
Yeah.
super familiar with. So maybe check that out too. But I don't know. It was like I said, I've been seeing you post a lot about it, and the stuff makes sense to me with like eccentric training in general. But it's just one of those things that is interesting to me, and I think with how in depth you look at a lot of this stuff, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I can learn from the stuff that you learned. So this is one of those things,
Yeah, man, I learned about flywheels from you. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just we've talked privately and probably on this a couple times about, and you already mentioned it, betting against conventional wisdom and kind of going against the grain, and not just doing it for the sake of doing it, not just doing it to be like a contrarian, but it's like this just makes too much sense.
Yeah.
Like, and I think for a while, I've probably thought about this for a couple years. Like this, it makes so much more sense to at least equally train eccentrically and isometrically as concentrically. It just makes sense. From a sprinting standpoint, from a jumping, throwing, like the better you can manage these high and fast eccentric loads, the better the output will be.
Yeah.
From like a stored elastic energy and just from a muscle standpoint. It just makes too much sense. And I don't know, just not confident enough and like, because I'm not seeing anyone else. There's people doing it, but I'm not seeing enough people do it where I'm like, bro, I need to go all in on it. And then there's Les Spellman, his like podcast, that Dr. Ken Clark, sprint researcher out of, I forget what university, but he was explaining like when sprinting at top speed, that first initial ground contact, like as soon as, at least elite level sprinters, as soon as they hit the ground, there's this huge peak in force output, and then it kind of slowly tapers off, or it's like a big peak, a quick drop, and then a slower drop off for the rest of the ground contact.
Yeah.
And he was like, that first big peak is all eccentric braking forces. And it's not that braking forces while sprinting are good. You don't want brakes, you want gas when sprinting. He's like, but you have to have it. Like you have to stop yourself from crashing into the ground. He's like, better sprinters just manage that peak better.
Yeah.
He's like, average sprinters, it just kind of, it lasts longer. They dissipate that force over a longer period of time. Like a parkour person jumping off a roof and rolling like we talked about. They're just managing it over a longer time. Sprinting, you don't want that. You want it to happen fast.
Yeah.
And he said, this is the, I forget if he said the tax or the toll you must pay in order to get to concentric, it's not exactly concentric, but to get to propulsive forces.
Sure.
It's like better sprinters manage that faster and better.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, just seeing some things here and there on social media, I'm like, no. I'm kind of going to go more all in on this.
Yeah.
Because it just makes sense. I know it's right.
Yeah.
And I just can't always prove it.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have people smarter than us to prove it and for it to kind of back up our kind of, thoughts that you're like you said, I can't really prove this, but there's too much out there that is pointing to the importance of this, and it just makes sense, and at that point, that's kind of like, kind of a good sign to dive deeper into it and to look more into it. I've also seen like Fred Duncan talk about it a little bit recently. He had a post about, he does a good job of framing things in kind of a different perspective. So he over the past couple of weeks, he had a post about like, a lot of people talk about like ankle stiffness, myself included, especially with sprinting. And it goes back to like what you're talking about with Ken Clark, like when you are sprinting and, one of the biggest things that at least I look for, and I know a lot of other people do, is like how stiff is your ankle upon, or your foot really in general, upon ground contact. If your foot, when you step, if your ankle kind of sinks a little bit, like you said, you're just handling that force over a longer period of time, where the higher level or faster people are able to have a stiff ankle. And his post was all about, I forget exactly how he put it, stop training ankle stiffness, but try to train like more proper positioning, if that makes sense. And I forget exactly what his whole idea was, but I've seen him talking about that, and also he recently made a post about just different types of eccentric training,
Yeah.
like within this last week or so. That was interesting to me because he does a good job of breaking it down and making it easy to understand.
He does.
You know what I mean?
He does.
So there's a ton of stuff out there that I think people are looking into, and kind of understanding the importance of this whole eccentric training phenomenon type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But it'll be fun to watch and see kind of how it grows and how people figure out, better ways, more efficient ways to kind of train it and measure it or test it in the future. Because I think it's only, again, it's not new, but I think it's only going to continue to grow in
Yeah.
popularity
Yeah.
as it kind of gets adapted more on the mainstream type of strength conditioning
Yeah.
thought pattern.
Yeah.
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 So, but that was good discussion about just kind of what eccentric training is and the importance of it and kind of where we're at with it. And because it's one of those things that I feel like, in the second semester over the past couple of years in the spring semester, one day of our accessories will be, like jumps or faster movements or things that we've spoken about in the past. And it's just one of those things as I continue to think about it, it's like, okay, maybe where is there a day that we can add in, or maybe once a day that we can add in, some type of eccentric type of accessory,
Yeah.
training where you're exposed to a slightly different stimulus than what we normally are concentrically.
Yeah.
So just what I've been thinking about lately, and something that's interesting to me that I think there's a ton of support behind.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So, but that was all good, man. I think that gives a good starting point for people that maybe if they don't even really understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Some of those books you mentioned from
Yeah.
Kyle Dietz or Michael Yesis or I'm sure there's other stuff out there too.
Yeah. Yeah. Watch out for the Russians. They got a lot of stuff
Yeah, they've been doing this stuff for a while now. So
at a high level with steroids.
yeah, so that's all good, man. But yeah, we'll keep knocking it out, man. We'll keep finding other stuff to talk about and stuff that we think is applicable to the people that might be listening to this. So
Yeah.
anything else, man?
No, that's it.
All right, bro. See y'all next week.